Hey guys, welcome to some student critiques for the Walk to the Lake 2 video lesson. We're on mypaintingclub.com. This is the lesson page. We're going to scroll down and see some of the student paintings that have been submitted. So let's look at one of these. Up the top left here we've got my painting, and we've got the photograph of Kinloch in the South Island. Beautiful spot. And this painting is from Elena. Thanks very much for your beautiful painting, Elena. I really love the color in this and the bold brushwork. Very nice. The drawing, which I know you've been improving over the years, is pretty good. And so that's really good to see. And your values are all good. Edges, yeah, edges are very good. You got some nice soft edges going on here. You've got soft versus sharp. Pretty soft edges back here in the background versus sharper edges in the foreground. Not exactly sure what's going on in that little section there. Let's see, what did I do? Okay, so that's some grass and stuff. Well, perhaps it could have just changed color a little more than, because it looks a lot like that color there. So yeah, it's a little disjointed, a little bit too many little pieces there, not really adding up to saying what it is. Would have just gone a little greener and maybe a little grayer back there. It just seems to be popping out. So this one is 30 centimeters by 60 centimeters. Now this is oils, Elena, but you are getting a lot of hard edges. Perhaps where you don't want them or need them, like around this little tree here that's very sharp. This little bit here, see, it's like dry brush going into the background. It could have been a soft edge. Certainly a lot of this stuff here was all hard edge, but it could have been a nice soft edge, sort of blended more into the background. So you're getting these, it looks very much like an acrylic painting, and I have to assume that's because you're using a fast drying medium like liquid or something that's drying really fast, and so you're getting an acrylic type effect. So I'm going to suggest that you move to a medium that is more slow drying, like walnut oil like I use, or something like that, with a very extended drying time, and that'll just give you the ability to blend these edges, just not have that sort of dry brush. See that, those broken little bits in there? It's like a dry brush effect instead of a smooth sort of a blended feel to it, like you can see up here. It's much of a softer blend, especially if you look at this little section here, right, where you've got this dark joining the light there. It's just looking quite dry brushy, like that layer is dried and then you've brushed into it and maybe have built it up with thin layers of paint, rather than going in with a thick bit of paint and making it all sort of blend together. So that's just some little tweaking things you can do to achieve a more painterly and fluid effect, rather than a thin dry brush type feel to it. Depends, you know, which way you want to go. Maybe you know, this is the look that you want. I do know that you like my painting style and that you want to head in that direction, so that's a little thing that you could do to make it more fluid and painterly, like that. Okay, so I hope that helps. A couple of brush strokes that jump out at me as being a little out of place is this one here, and again, that's, I think, because of this area was all dry, and then you've brushed this on later and it's left this hard edge down here, and so it's really standing out rather than being softly blended into that area. And same goes with these streaks across here. Looks like they were done when this whole area was dry, and which is not necessarily a bad thing, but there's just a lot of paint gone down there, and it's a little light and it's just jumping out a little bit too much. If you look take a look at that, it's much more of a subtle effect. So because it's really drawing the eye, there's a lot of contrast there, and of course you're getting the horizontal versus the vertical, so it's really drawing the eye where it needn't be drawing the eye in that area. Okay, overall really nice though. Those are just a few little points, hope that helps. Now this one is a watercolor and gouache by Canadian artist Eric. Hey Eric, thanks for your beautiful painting. Some really nice stuff going on here in the watercolor. Particularly loving the softness of a lot of these edges that you're achieving in here. And I love the color, the strong color, this orange versus the blues. Beautiful stuff. And I love this area. This is really nicely done. Looks like you planned that one. So it came out real nice. This little, see that little hard edge there kind of spoils this big reflection area, unfortunately. I think you are on the right track here too, although that could have been softened out over a larger area, so you're not getting this little block of darkness there. So just a little more care with this gradation through this whole area would have made that, yeah, just look more like a sky reflection, rather than a little edge like that and a little edge like that is saying that, well, it's reflecting something or something is happening to the surface of the water. There's a little issue with the drawing here, Eric, where you've drawn the bay like that, and what you're actually needing, if you look at the photo from this angle, is sections that go sort of straight on the bottom, and then it comes in a curve like that. Okay, so that's what it's missing here. You could have made that straighter, made another little section here which come out like that, and then brought that a little harder back here, and then curve down, that sort of thing. Also, this in the photo you got some foliage over here, and it's disguising those tree trunks a little bit, right? It's hiding them back there, and obviously you've taken that on board, but I don't think it's working as well in this situation. In this case, I would have just made those grey tree trunks and cast a stronger shadow onto the little building back there, and also done more to darken this area here, just connect that all together. It just looks a little odd the way it's, just the whole structure of that thing is just a little odd. Just go to the, so see how that's all dark through this section here? Yeah. Something you've missed out on here, and it's the reason why these little dark holes through the tree are looking like they're poking out too much, is because you haven't gone into the halftones in your shadow areas here, right? So it's very much all the same value. You've started to go a little darker, but you could have gone darker still. If you look at the photo, if you squint down at, say, this block here, right, then you've got a big value change from, say, here to the dark foliage and the shadow there, right? Okay, they're two very different colors in there. If you look at this color here, goes from light through to dark, and then we've got a little dark shadow hole through there, right? So that really helps, because what you've got here is this flat color, flat orange color all over, and then little holes poke through it without actually any transitioning through to the dark. So that's why it's looking like these little dark shapes are all sort of sitting on top of the tree rather than being behind the tree. It's nice that you worked a soft edge into some of the hill in the background there. That's a nice subtle thing. You could be a little more careful with the base of this, just to make it straight and flat, because at the moment, you know, it's all over the show. And for a detail on the edge here, I wouldn't put so much detail into it. I'd just make that a little blob of soft edged color rather than you know, delineating everything, because you really are creating a contrast and a hard edge, and that's drawing the eye to here. Like, why should I be looking at the edge of the painting? You really want to, you know, soften that all down so that your eye stays in the center of the painting. Similarly, this light shape here is sort of funneling off the page, so you could have, I mean, you've sort of combined the two scenes here. What you could have done is looked at these shadow shapes here, and that actually is a soft shadow through, well, through that area, and look at these shadow shapes down here, and the way these clumps are casting shadows like that, right? And you could have brought that into here to stop the eye from getting dragged off to the side of the painting. So all of this here could have been in a soft shadow or a hard shadow. Okay, a few little things. I hope that helps. So this one's by Barbara. Hey Barbara, thanks for your beautiful painting. There's a lot of nice stuff going on here. I like this big design here. This here is the big shape, which is nice. And then you got these big shapes going on. These ones not too sure about, because they are very similar. I see you've put little differences in there, but they are very parallel. And although you get that in the mountains, I always find it better to adjust it, you know, something like that might be better, so that you've got a shape that's not so boring, a little more dynamic. I think the softness of the reflections in the water, these, you know, the way you've got them blending is really good. Unfortunately, these little light strokes are really hard edged, and they're taken away from that because they're sort of drawing your eye to those things. And the only reason they would be that harsh is if you would have white water here, right? So they're sort of incongruous to the real sheer reflectivity of all that smooth water. So got a couple of suggestions, and I went a little bit crazy here and painted over. Let me show you. Okay, so there's before and after. Now I'll just move it over so I can point out some things that are changed. So I can see there's a few little changes. The first thing I did was get all of the green out of this water. It's a bit, see, it's very much the same color as that, and it's just all jumping forward a bit because it is a strong green, whereas you want it to sit back, because this here and that's what we want the eye to go to, right? So if you look at my version, I just subdued the color, made it a little more gray, a little more bluey gray in that area, and a little warmer here, a little warmer and grayer. So I took out so much yellow from there. Next thing I did was just adjust the shapes in the background here. I made the sky a little darker in there, and I darkened down this whole shape and here, so that these light shapes here could stand out against it. Because let's look at your painting in grayscale, and I'll show you what's going on there. Okay, so you can see all that is very much a very similar value. I've got a little darker behind here, which is good, but if you took that little bit of darkness out, you'd see that that is very, very similar to that. So basically you're not having any shape variety back there, because that has all turned into one block with a gradation, really, which is okay. But if you just darken all of that down a little bit, it just makes this pop out a little bit stronger, which is a nice effect. Another thing I did was see how this line of the beach here is actually interfering with this line here. They're both very similar lines and they're a little bit confused. Like, you could look at that and think, well, is that the top railing of this thing here, or what is it? So it's a little confusing, and it draws the eye away from this structure. Okay, so if you look, what I did was just darken all of that down and soften off all the edges so that I could bring these details out against all of that. Okay, and I actually dropped the line of that beach. That doesn't really make sense here in your one. So the beach is running like that, and then suddenly it's going along like that. So what I've done is just, if you can see, to continue that line like that, see here, and just darken and soften all of that area in there, get rid of all that detail that you just don't need. And then I took this darkness and reflected it in the water and made that all soft through there, and that allowed these posts here to really, the light ones, to jump out against that darkness, right? And also creating that soft transition here from dark to light. That is helping create recession here, whereas you've got a block of all the same color in there and here, and that's flat, right? If you want recession, you make gradients. And I mentioned these before, that they're detracting from the water, so I just got rid of those and made this a lot simpler. Another thing I did if you look at these shapes here, you've got that whole thing divided in half, really. So they're two pretty similar shapes. So just by adding a shadow across here, you're making these two light shapes unbalanced, which is much more natural looking, more interesting. Other thing I did was to darken the beach, make one big dark shape like that, which gives us more clues as to the direction of the light. So you've got a lot of sort of dark and light little shapes in there. So I just simplified it. I put a little yacht way there in the distance, and I suggest, if you're going to do little birds like that, to not have them the same size and same shape and same angle, and, you know, being equal distance from each other like that. Let me show you how I'd do that if I was going to put birds in there. Basically, think about one of those triangles that is more really long on one side and a little shorter, and then like that, instead of that sort of triangle. Okay, let's put one over here. Oop, too light. So a real small one over there. Okay, maybe even a few little ones down there. Maybe one just landing on the post there. Another thing I did was to introduce a big simple shape here, because in here it was just, I don't know, looking like you weren't quite sure what was happening there. Also, I bought this stuff and that in front of that, right? Whereas you've got this which should be all in the distance, somehow overlapping this stuff, which looks like it's in the foreground, which is a little bit odd. And the very last thing I did was to introduce this big soft shadow across the foreground, and I'll show you what it looks like with and without it. So that's without, and that's with. So that just helps to push your eye in that direction, away from the bottom and into the center of interest. Oh, another thing I did was to introduce this shape here, another light shape, which is basically a balance to this big light shape here. So I hope that helps. It's given you a few things to think about. So let's take a look at this one. It's got a really nice simple feel to it. I like these nice organic shapes that you got here. You know, they're very, I don't know, it just feels nice. Feels to me almost like a, especially with these little blocky things in here, sort of like a Cezanne in a way. However, if you are trying to get it to look like this one, there's some easy things that I can point out that will help you get closer to that look. First of all, interestingly, this one looks like a grey day, right? Overcast. And this one looks like a, well, like it's kind of stormy, but it's got direct, strong sunlight there, whereas this one looks like sort of overcast, filtered grey light. And there is one really good reason for that. It's simply because in this one I've got strong, dark, crisp shadows, whereas this one we don't have any cast shadows. It's all very soft. Okay, and that's exactly what happens on a grey day. So if you did want this to look more sunny, just make darker, crisper looking shadows. Second thing is the drawing. You've made the bay come up like this, down like that, whereas if you look at this, this is pretty much a straight line across there, and then it just, that's the line of the bay there, right? That's the line of the edge of the water. So it's intersecting with the dock there, sort of halfway through, but it's I've softened it off, right, so it doesn't interfere with the line of the dock. So basically, to fix that in your one, you just need to run this stuff here through there, bring all this down to here, and that's it really. It's great that you've added a little boat on the end there. That's cool. I can see you've worked this area over quite a little bit, and you've had darker stuff there to begin with, and then you've lightened it, it looks like. So you've ended up with almost an outline effect of slightly darker stuff and a little dark blob there, and that's sort of spoiling the three-dimensionality of this hill. You could just block it in all a little bit darker, and that'd solve your problem there. All these reflections here could be a little darker, and could have more of a transition through this whole area, going from slightly darker here to, well, that's about right, but slightly darker here. Just makes this big shape more interesting, and also pushes your eye from the dark into the light. Little look at your trees here. See how they're all very similar thickness and distance apart. Just be aware of that. Take a look at how I did that. It's you got basically a daddy one there and a mummy one there, and a child there, maybe a granddad down here. Okay, think of them as a family of shapes, and think about the line of them. You know, it's very easy to fall into the trap of making these lines all parallel, and we do that with mountains a lot. You know, when we draw some mountains and we go, oh, those that was nice, and then we go, oh yeah, well, do that again. So just be aware that that's a tendency and try and fight against it. But you know, even without those changes that I've suggested, you've got a beautiful painting here. You've got a place that someone would want to walk out onto the end of this dock and hop in that boat and go for a little paddle, you know. So good on you, and I look forward to seeing you next one. Cheers. So let's take a look at this one. Got some really nice thick juicy paint on here, which is great to see. A lot of people are afraid of spending paint like that. Especially nice to see you pouring it on in the light areas, and especially here and here. It's great, really good to see thick impasto stuff in the lights. Your drawing is really good. You've got these angles pretty right where these things intersect, the curve of the beach, and just the levels of everything are pretty good. A couple of things to look at. This design here, you've got, even though the drawing of the angle of the beach is good, you're taking people right from this corner to this edge, whereas traditionally you kind of want to keep people away from the corners and the edges, right? Which is why I designed this to come in here, not over here, and to turn here and give all of this space here. And although I did create this shape here, I haven't made too much contrast there to draw the eye. See, I've softened off the edges there and graded off a little bit. What I could have done, which might have been even better, was to create another overlapping shape there to keep people away from there altogether. So what I would do if I had a canvas that ratio is probably to have the beach come off here or have it overlap here, right? Either that and turn a little bit earlier, or come in like that and turn a little bit earlier, probably like that. Also, this dark and light contrast you've got in this area and your signature there is drawing the eye to that corner. So what you can do is, first of all, move your signature over here, if I may, and just darken off the water in that area to remove the contrast, right? So that's before and after, and you can see, if you look at the painting as a whole, how suddenly the eye is drawn that way more, because this no longer has to fight with that to catch the eye. Last thing I'll point out is the color usage has gone pretty gray and dull in a lot of the areas here, especially here and back here. Okay, and I think that is because you're using either black or Payne's gray or blue and burnt sienna as a combination to make your darks, and basically just not putting enough color in there, relying on those dark grays to make your darks. Whereas if you look at this, there's a lot of color, so there's a dark green in there, there's a mid-gray blue, back here it's very blue, and there's some green, and you know, some variations of color instead of, so here it's mainly just a neutral gray with variations in value. Same thing here, very sort of neutral muddy gray without a lot of actual color in there, so that's something to be aware of. You can see it here as well. You've just sort of spilled that brown color down onto the beach, hoping that that would make the shadow color, but if you look over here, the shadow color was actually more of a something like that, maybe a little darker, to suit your painting. And doing that, having shadows that are cooler, makes it look like a warmer light, because a warm light tends to give cooler shadows, and a cooler light, like an overcast day, tends to give warmer shadows. Okay, a couple of things to think about. Hope you found that useful. Good work.